My name is Brandy Votava, and I am the Director of Operations for Working Partners. The objective for this session is we are going to be talking about marijuana-specific nuances in regards to the 5 elements of a drug-free workplace. And we're also going to be talking about how to navigate those sensitive conversations within the workforce. But with that being said, I do want to state that we have not taken a formal stand in support or in opposition of the marijuana issue too. But with that being said, I'm going to move along here and introduce our speakers. So first we have Renee West. She is responsible for leading the entire human resources consulting practice with Ray & Associates. And she does that through her expertise of the compliance regulations and HR guidance. And then next we have Katie Lemke, also known as
Zumagala.
Zumagala.
Yep. that was a marriage. So just put that out there.
Thank you, Katie, for bailing me out there. Katie is the training coordinator for SafeX, which means that she oversees all of the training and education operations, but she also provides training for businesses that are located in Northwest Ohio. And now I'm going to go ahead and let Katie take it from here so I don't bite too much into your time.
Perfect, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So we are going to be talking about how to prepare, and I'm talking specifically, if you were here in the last session, Karen ended with those 5 elements of a best practice drug-free workplace. I'm going to be diving into those on what you really need to be looking at. But look, I managed to coordinate with my photo today. I couldn't have planned that. But I did actually used to work for Working Partners. I was with them for a number of years, and I was the coordinator of the Drug-Free Workforce Community Initiative, and I've been a trainer doing drug-free workplace for quite a while. So the first place I wanted us to start with is to know that, just like Karen said, substance aside, these 5 elements that we're going to talk about are really what's going to set up a business up to consistently and successfully respond to substance use. Doesn't matter the substance, it's always something new, right? But I wanted to first give us this quick little picture because we do have research that shows the impact of substance use on a workplace. We know that people who misuse substances are 33 to 50% less productive. That they're missing 3 weeks more per year, are tardy 3 times more. So we have that data. They're filing 300 to 400% more medical claims, which of course impacts everybody, right? Especially if you're an organization that's paying for health insurance, those premium increases are going to be felt across the board. We see 50 to 80% of workplace theft is attributed to alcohol and other drugs. And then if none of the other ones existed and we focused just on the accidents, this alone would be worthy enough of having a drug-free workplace program, in that we know that 40% of workplace fatalities are related to alcohol or other drug use, similar to 47% of workplace serious injuries having that relation to alcohol and other drug use. So if you ever need to justify it and you need some numbers to put behind it, right here is a good place to start. At SafeX, we do drug-free workplace training and education. And this is a lot of what we spend our time focusing on, especially when we're looking at helping organizations understand the impact and the importance, is following through on these. Ohio BWC actually put out this quote. It was in one of their employer programs annual reports, I think 2 years ago, but I thought the data was really helpful. They showed that people who are participating in their drug-free safety program saw more than a 50% improvement to loss ratio. And that was compared to those not participating only saw 7%. So again, if you're those numbers people, that's some of the data to look at. And just because you're going to get the slides, I tossed in some information about the Ohio Drug-Free Safety Program in case you're not participating. There are some levels you can get rebates. And I also tossed in a slide on the Substance Use Recovery and Workplace Safety Program. I actually have a handout for you if you want to learn about the reimbursement opportunities here. For Ohio businesses that do their workers' comp through BWC, you can actually get reimbursed up to $5,000 a year for education and training. let alone you can get reimbursed for policy and some drug testing too. But I just put them there so you'd have them if you want to pull those slides down. But the thing I want you to think about is, BWC said, 50% or improvement to your loss ratio if you're in the drug-free safety program. Well, here's the thing. You don't have to be in the drug-free safety program to see that, because it's this. It's this right here. It's these 5 elements that are being implemented and followed, and you can start to see those as well. So I'm going to dive into each one of these. And then as I do that, I'll point out the marijuana nuances within them. So the first one is having that policy and operations, just like Karen mentioned, legally defensible, but also operational. You want to make sure your rules and your consequences, your definitions are all outlined in there. And then you got to make sure it's followed, right? Because anybody who's had a policy knows that you can write policies day in and day out, put them in a binder, up on a shelf, and nobody looks at them again. Mm-hmm. When I get to my third point today, I'm going to show you how we do that, how we really help get that consistently followed. With your policy, you got to make it match your practices. When I was with working partners and did policy development, that was a conversation we had all the time was, okay, so fine, you want to put in random testing, but are you going to do it? Okay, fine, you want to say you're not going to do this, but are you? So we want to make sure it matches up. When it comes to employee education, you want to get in front of everybody. And what a great opportunity to talk about that policy, to continually bring it up in front of them, right? Just the same as you're going to hear me talk about things that Karen talked about, and Renee's probably going to talk about some things that I talked about, and in the third session, we're probably going to review all the other ones. We know we have to repeat information for it to sink in. Now you add in something like a drug-free workplace program that people don't think about, maybe don't interact with. You definitely have to get it in front of their face a little bit more. And a great opportunity to do that is during the employee education session. Now, Karen also pointed out that data of how, we've been doing a great job of prevention with our youth, but then maybe not so great with our adults because we've seen that increase. Well, the workplace is a perfect place for it. Where else are they getting this objective research-based information? Now, I know we can go Google everything, right? And I can always find the thing that supports my view. But what an opportunity you have as a workplace to get in front of your staff with this information. I would even toss out toolbox talks. You can have that 15 minutes a week, 5 minutes a day, however you're doing it. In this case, especially when it comes to the drug-free safety program, it's an annual requirement. But you're getting in front of them about those low-risk guidelines with alcohol use. Maybe what your expectations are around medications. All of this is to maybe talk about a topic along with your program that's relevant and engaging. And of course, the goal of employee education is really you want them to recognize and handle a problem before it ever comes on your job, right? Wouldn't that be great? You never saw it. It happened, they took care of it, and poof, it's gone. And maybe you hear about it a couple years later and you're like, oh, you're in recovery? I had no idea, right? It never came across your door. When it comes specific to marijuana, I wanted to point out a couple of areas that you really want to make sure you're hitting in employee education. I know with my training sessions this year, that's all I'm focusing on is marijuana. It's been such a heavily requested topic that I'm covering Northwest Ohio talking about weed. So I don't have quite the gray hair as Karen yet. Wait, that sounded terrible. But first of all, we want to get in front of them about their assumptions. Maybe you've heard them talking about, well, it's legal, so you have to allow it. Or, well, it's legal, so you're probably not going to be testing for it anyway. Get in front of your staff. Maybe before you hear them talking about it so that you can set the record straight. Or, once you do hear some grumblings, have those conversations and be clear about what the organization really is doing. I will tell you, you could be making the same assumptions that say, well, our policy says we won't permit, and the employee is still going to think that it's permitted because there's a law. We know we have medical, potentially adult use coming up. So we want to get in front of them about that. Karen touched a little bit on that navigating CBD. This is a conversation, even though it's been around the last few years, still conversations I'm having on the not well-regulated system and people innocently getting CBD, and it has a high THC content. So part of one of my training sessions is actually pointing out, if you're going for this product, here are things to be looking for. So get in front of them about that. Your policy specifics. Talk to them about your stance and why you're doing it, what the expectations are. And of course, are there assistance options if somebody themselves has an issue, maybe somebody in their family? Because let's not pretend like people's home lives don't impact them at work, right? So are there assistance options that are available? And I'll hit that on number 5 today. And of course, then talk to them about marijuana. I've been doing that all this season, is talking about what are the impacts of marijuana. I've been talking about impairment and potency, about how it impacts our heart and our lungs, and what does impairment really look like, and how it's more mental than physical. But we get ourselves so caught in the physical stuff, we miss the mental stuff. So getting in front of them about these can certainly help. And this is just marijuana, right? Because that's what we're here to talk about today. But you could do this for any substance. And that's the beauty of the 5 elements, is that, again, it doesn't matter the substance, this whole system works. So during an employee education session, that's an all-staff thing. So your supervisors are coming in for that as well, and it's perfect because it lays this groundwork. You're talking about policy, you're getting the staff to maybe engage with you in an activity to talk about the policy. And I would encourage that when you're doing your employee education, is not just reading things off or reminding people, engage them. We do a lot of true and false and Jeopardy games to get them, regurgitating the information they have about your program. So doing those kinds of things. And then we want to pull those supervisors aside. And we want to have a more deep dive into, all right, how do we really handle this? What do we really do? And that allows them a space where they can say, I have no clue what I'm supposed to do with that. And you're not in front of the whole staff hearing your supervisor or your safety director say, I have no clue what to do, right? So you give them the space to do that. Again, this should be annual. Have this process regularly where you're reviewing your protocols and their role. Because let's be honest, like, your supervisor may have this tiny step or two in this whole thing compared to maybe a program administrator covering the rest of it. But help them see their role. Or maybe you have somebody who's been with the organization for 30 plus years and thinks that everything's his role, and maybe you got to put him in his lane a little bit. So help pointing out, what is your role compared to other people? Talking about those warning signs, again, of course, because we're talking about marijuana today, but get yourself a reasonable suspicion checklist. That should be definitely one of the tools as a part of your policy. If you have a working partners policy, it's included. If you're part of the SafeX Training of Trainers program, it's included. If you don't have one, we can chat, but have that, because that really makes documentation easier, but it also is a great tool for kind of determining what's that objective data I'm looking for, whatever the substance is. Again, we're going back to that fitness for duty. What am I looking for here? Make sure we're talking to our supervisors about when to test. And of course, the big thing to hit home with supervisors is role playing and doing the skills. You want them to feel confident about your program and to be able to consistently have follow through. And that's a lot of what I've talked about this year too, is there may be a general understanding of what I have to do, but being able to follow through, to get my head above water to address any of these things can be really difficult. So giving them the space to do that. Specific to marijuana, I just highlighted a handful of scenarios you might consider running through. Of course, if you get a tip about somebody, right? Maybe it comes from a coworker or a sub or someone from the general public. All right, this supervisor group, this tip comes in. What do we do? What does it say? What does our policy say we'll do? What would you do? How do we handle this? Maybe you run a scenario on finding paraphernalia. Do you pick it up? Do you leave it? Do you put cones around it? Do we call the police? Like, what is the process? What if somebody gives you a confession? As a supervisor, I might be saying, okay, Joe, it's time to go for a random, and Joe's like, I don't think we want to do that. What's that supervisor supposed to do? Take him to the program administrator, ask him why, what does that look like? Do you still send him for the random test? Those are the things that we want to work through, because I think we can all agree, my common sense looks different from your common sense, different from Carl's common sense, So we don't want to rely on, well, they know what to do. They might not, so let's tell them. If somebody gets a medical card, how do we want to handle that? Maybe they're not reporting for their accident timely. But what does timely mean? That kind of goes with my last one. What's our accident protocol? And how does that match with our drug-free workplace program? And of course, maybe they're like taking 3 hours to go for a test, and you're like, this seems weird. What do we do in those scenarios? So these are just some highlights. Again, you can apply them to marijuana, any substance, but the idea is that you get them working in a group, and you set it up where they can look through the policy, they can outline what they would do, they can get feedback from their group, and really try to run it. Because you know as well as I do that if I've at least ran it before, it's somewhere in my head if the situation comes up again, versus trying to remember a policy I saw 12 years ago or something. Hopefully you're not waiting 12 years to update your policy, but is that a good enough plug? Okay. Another piece that in this whole process is making sure we're doing appropriate testing. Karen talked a little about the when we're going to be testing, what they're going to be testing for, and how. You do want that to be outlined in your program. And of course, this is a part of a drug-free workplace policy, but I want you to remember that it's an information gathering tool and not a way to catch somebody. So it's just a tool as a part of this whole process. There should be more in your program around the rules that don't just have to do with testing. We just want to make sure that the policy is really clear on this. When it comes to the how, I pulled up just this little, not real great to see in here, but you'll see it in the slides. Specific to marijuana, it talks about the different types of testing that are available. Urine, of course, is still the gold standard. I think I have that as green. If you're under the Department of Transportation or Ohio BWC's drug-free safety program, that's still the only one you can use. Oral fluid, though, has been approved. We just don't have the labs or the devices yet to fully implement, but that'll be coming next. Hair testing hasn't been approved for either one of those. So if you're not under those authorities, you could be doing hair testing. Breath and blood, only for alcohol right now, but we're primarily looking at the urine and oral fluid testing. And of course, like Karen mentioned, the windows of detection are different. This was a little piece I pulled up, but I do want to point out that this does vary a little bit in those hours, but it just kind of shows you, I just liked how it had it across the different hours where you can see that, there's windows here that oral fluid testing is going to get us to that urine testing couldn't. But of course, it all comes down to that none of these are testing for impairment. Oral fluid testing gets us close because of the window, but that's still a presence of. It's still what's in the system and not an impairment. So I just wanted to point that out so you had that perspective. And I just added in here one of these great pieces in talking with your team during employee education is that marijuana impairment can take effect in as little as 10 minutes, last up to 10 hours, and some functions can be impaired up to 24 hours. So especially when you're looking at making those decisions on how you want to implement things within your program or where you want to set your policies, is keeping in mind that impairment for marijuana does look different than other substances. And lastly, through all of those things, we want to make sure we're rounding out with some options for our employees. There could be a couple of different ways that this happens. So one, there could be an employee who just wants to get help on their own. And you have resources for them available. Or it could be that there's maybe been a violation of the program, and so one of the pieces of your policy is that they have to go for an assessment in order to continue working for you. Whatever the case may be is, It's really great if you have the resources that you can set up with an employee assistance program, so an external provider that the company usually pays for, and then they can get access to sessions or resources, some of which would be great if it's substance related, but like I mentioned, some of that stuff isn't even substance related, it's home stuff, it's my family, it's my finances, it's my aging parents, it's whatever the case may be, and that they have access to get those. Or maybe instead of actually paying for something as an organization, you just make sure that they know about the resources that are available. So that you know the community, what the community has, that you're posting findtreatment.gov so they can search the nation, which that website's gotten really great, by the way. You can do a lot more manipulation than you could even 5 years ago. But you're providing those resources so that they can get the help before it ever shows up on the job. And all of this here, all of these elements are really creating a win-win for both you as the employer and the employees. And kind of went through and just summarized some of these pieces here. But you can see that as an employer, I'm reducing accidents, I'm increasing productivity, those costs are going down. Of course, maybe I'm satisfying some contract obligations too, or making sure I'm meeting my right requirements under my authorities. And of course, maybe there's some financial incentives, but as an employee then, like, I'm more compliant, right? You've routinely gotten in front of me about the program, so I understand that. And I understand these other things that maybe I didn't know before about medication use or marijuana or different, what addiction looks like that maybe I didn't otherwise have access to. We're motivating people and helping them or encouraging them to get support, and maybe even supporting people who are already in recovery. Imagine the stage you're setting there for the morale within the organization. If you have someone already in recovery and you're implementing these things, I think that can be really impressive. And then, of course, we're encouraging wellness across the board. SafeX is moving into worker well-being, and I think we're doing that along with a whole lot of other organizations. We're seeing increases in people who are organizations that really want to look at the employee as a whole and how we are helpful to all the facets, because after all, we're humans and we're not just robots working. So this does help encourage that. I'll get the handout out for after the session, but we have a Get Paid to Operate a Drug-Free Workplace in Ohio, where I talk about in depth the drug-free safety program, the substance use recovery and workplace safety grant, that reimbursement, as well as a little more in depth on the 5 losses and the 5 elements of a drug-free safety program. So I'll have those sitting out at the table here before you guys head out, but it's also down at our table. I would encourage you just to listen in if you wanted to hear more about those. Oh, the reimbursement sheet, what you actually get reimbursed for, is actually on the handout too. So just a great opportunity to hear more about the options here in Ohio. Thanks.
All right. Renee, you're looking at about 17 minutes, just so you know.
Okay, I can do that. And I'm standing right in between lunch, right?
Yep.
That's always the best speaking part to have, speaking time. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Can you hear me okay? Does that sound okay? Mm-hmm. Great. So my name is Renee West with Ray & Associates, and I have had the pleasure of being in HR for over 28, but under 30 years. So have seen a lot of conversations, things that have happened in the workplace over the years. And part of what I want to talk through today is going through some case scenarios, sharing some best practices with you, looking at how do you have conversations that a lot of times might not be ones that you want to have. How many of you like to have sensitive conversations with people? I don't see anybody have their hands up. So definitely, that is something too that is very challenging. So we want to talk through some resources as it relates to that as well. So, actually, I'm going the wrong way, aren't I? Hold on here. There we go. So what we want to talk through today is the impact of what we're talking about here, that all of us have had information about the marijuana, about what we're looking at, but how does that impact HR? What should organizations be focused on as it relates to HR? Because that is a pretty broad umbrella. So we're going to share a little bit of information about that. And then we're also going to talk through, this is a lot of information that is new, and some of it has been in existence for a while, but you also have your managers and supervisors that are what we call on the front line of being out working with your people. You might be working with them indirectly as well. It's important that they have the resources to know how to have conversations. And that is sometimes the hardest thing to do, is to tell someone, here's what you have to do. So we want to share some scenarios about how to have those conversations and what those look like. And I wouldn't be talking about HR if we didn't have a list of best practices for you. So when you're having those types of discussions, what should they look like? Who should be a part of them? What are just the best practices? Okay? Sounds exciting, I know, right? Okay. So as we talk through and look at the importance of what we're talking about today, a lot of what Karen and Katie have shared, we are looking at a lot of information that you've heard about already. So how can we ensure that policies and communications are consistent from an HR perspective? Utilize the resources through working partners. Also looking at, as you mentioned, job descriptions to ensure that your job descriptions are accurate and up to date as it relates to what those particular duties are. HR looks at a lot of compliance. So this is something that when you say compliance or you say HR, people think, oh, something else we need to learn. But it's very important to have those resources as well. And how safety impact is also very important. HR does play, a portion of safety. However, the biggest part is ensuring that you're providing that training to your workforce. And again, the resources that we've talked about today here are helpful in doing that as well. Part of what we look at as the consulting part of what we do when we go into organizations is just having those conversations and training and working with your team to develop and help, because a lot of times HR might be handled by 2 or 3 different people within an organization, or maybe they don't have anyone that's doing HR. So they're looking at what should those resources be, and that's where we can come into play to help with that as well. Who can tell me what a soft skill is? I'm going to make you think here before lunch.
Some type of education or skill that somebody has that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the compliance issue.
Good. So listening skills, how to speak, how to listen. When you talk about being in the workplace and working with individuals, these soft skills a lot of times are things that maybe are put off to the side. You might have managers, supervisors, leaders that are promoted into certain positions that maybe have never had to do this type of position before. So those soft skills are something that are very important, and it's across the board in all organizations. Being able to listen to your employees, being able to have those conversations, and know the best way to phrase those are definitely very, very important. So that's a little bit about the soft skills piece. When we talk about looking at, excuse me, my thing's stuck here.
Didn't stop on you.
It did. There we go. Okay. When we talk about best practices from an employer perspective as it relates to HR, and again, this is just kind of high level. If you're concerned that there might be an issue with an employee, how do you have that conversation? And employers, obviously, you should only have these conversations in a private location. One of the things that we want to talk about is you're not going to be, so for example, if you have a production line and you have a group of individuals that are talking and the supervisor overhears, and this is one of the scenarios that I have in here, but we'll talk about it now, overhears that, hey, there was a big party that they had over the weekend, and what should that supervisor be listening for? is that supervisor able to go up to a person and say, hey, I heard you were at a party this weekend, we're going to send you for testing? That's not something that you would do, but it does happen. So it's important that the supervisors know, again, as Katie mentioned, from a training perspective, what can you and can you not do? You want to be sure that you're cognizant of the fact too that people are people, and ensuring that you know from a legal perspective. And again, I'm going to put a disclaimer in there that I should have put at the beginning. We are not attorneys. We do not provide legal advice, but we do have resources to help with that. One of the other things that we get a lot of questions on is scenarios. So how can you best work with your organizations? And one of the biggest things is, I'm not going to get into determining whether a person is impaired or not, because you've spoken about that. That's your expertise. One of the things, so if we have a situation and we work with a supervisor, and as a soft skills section of, we want to talk with them about someone they feel who might be impaired. So as part of that process, that individual who is the supervisor needs to understand what the policies and procedures are that you do have in place. So how do they have that conversation with that employee? Obviously, you're not going to do that right in front of everyone else that's there. So bringing that individual into the HR office, if you have an HR person, is definitely something that you want to have those conversations away from where it's happening. That's one of the biggest things that you have to ensure, that confidentiality. A lot of times there might be situations where you have a group of individuals that are talking and sharing information as well, and trying to, again, be that soft skills trained individual to know that I need to take this person out of this situation, and help them to continue to have a conversation in a quiet location, okay? One of the biggest things that we see out there is, I'm sorry, this thing keeps going back. Sorry. Okay, sorry, it's like sticking and then it goes.
Want to do a Band-Aid on the computer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe that'll help. Yeah, it goes back, but it won't go. Sorry.
Tell me when.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. So conducting sensitive conversations. And again, these are best practices that we can elaborate on even further. Who has HR within their organizations? Okay. One of the things, obviously, from a policy perspective is to ensure that from a supervisor and a manager perspective, anytime there's conversations, having the HR individual be a part of that conversation as well is definitely something that is important and actually required in most organizations. As far as having those crucial conversations, has anyone heard of the Crucial Conversations trainings? I see, yes, some in the back. These are definitely something that, did you feel it was helpful?
Very helpful.
Okay. And when you think of crucial conversations, most organizations think it has to be this elaborate conversation, but it can be applicable to anything that's safety related, anything that is just how to have conversations about someone that might be having an issue. One of the biggest things from the HR side, like we talked about, is being able to have that conversation and know what to say and what not to say. And as supervisors and managers, if you're bringing someone into and having this conversation, you always want to have a witness with you when you're having these type of conversations. It can be another member, if HR is not available, another person within the organization, to be with you to have that conversation of, you know what, we are concerned there might be an issue. Maybe there's something that they might come back and say, as Katie mentioned, they need help with something. So that supervisor being able to listen and hear that that person is saying, you know what, I need some help from a perspective of drug and alcohol counseling, and knowing what that EAP program is. There have been some situations where we have seen clients and companies that I worked at before, where they have not had anybody as a witness during those conversations. And sometimes, I see the frown there, sometimes that can definitely hinder the next steps of having that conversation by not having someone there, because the employee can say, well, they told me this, and the supervisor says, well, I know that this is the policy that I told him, but you always need to have someone there. And I can't say that enough about any conversation that you have. One of the biggest things too, obviously I'm sure you touched on it, is confidentiality. And anytime that you're having issues with an employee or something where they need to be sent for testing, or there's a concern, that confidentiality is always important. I actually worked in an organization at one time where, and this was years ago, where an individual, they had random testing, and a couple individuals refused to go for that testing, and the people around them were giving them a hard time, and they ended up walking out because they felt that they didn't want to do the testing. And employees started talking about it, started going to each other, and you can't obviously keep employees from talking, but it's important to stress the importance of keeping things confidential from a practice perspective. One of the biggest questions that we receive from supervisors and managers of where do we stop and where do we start? And I think you mentioned in your training the importance of knowing what their requirements are for when they should have HR involved and what that looks like, or if they should have another manager as part of that process. When we talk about crucial conversations and being able to facilitate those, they are the hardest ones to have. But training your team is important from a consistent basis of being able to learn how to communicate. Some individuals will receive information better if it's communicated or if it's written down or if you read something to them as it relates to a policy. But the biggest piece is being able to have that team trained to know when to have those conversations. Has anyone ever encountered a situation or where you had to have a crucial conversation that you weren't sure what to say? So I'm sure that happens a lot. So think about your supervisors and managers and leaders that are out working with your people that might be having the need to have this come up in this issue, that's out there, and all the questions that are out there. They're probably thinking, what am I supposed to say? So be sure, again, that you're utilizing resources to really offer those as best practices. Whenever we talk about other best practices of HR and when it relates to conversations, I could talk about this for days, but the biggest piece is ensuring that you have consistency in your training for your managers and your supervisors about what your policies are, what the process is, who they report them to. That's very important. I did have some other scenarios, but I think we've talked about a few of those already, so I don't want to reiterate that part. One of the things that I did also want to share with everyone is the importance of keeping up on legislation, as they mentioned. With everything that's going on from an HR perspective, there's a lot of changes and updates from compliance, not only related to this, but also other items as well. So utilize the resources around you. We also have consulting services that can help you if you have questions as it relates to any type of HR issue as well. We don't just limit it to drug and alcohol. There's always a lot of questions out there. Like I said, I've been in HR for many years, and there's still things that come up that I don't know the answers to. But using those resources consistently will definitely help your individuals in your workplace too. Okay? I think I'm going to let you, any questions, or we can end early and go to lunch.
Some lunch. All right, well, thank you, Renee.
Thank you.